our topic for this session is oral literature. As you already know, we have talked about written literature. When we talk about literature, we have two main divisions of literature. We have the written literature and we have the unwritten literature. Now, under the written literature, we have the novels, we have poems, we also have drama. But under the unwritten literature, which is the oral literature, we have poems and drama as well. But when we look at oral literature, we are looking at that type of literature that has been passed down orally, that is by word of mouth, from one generation to another. So we're looking at the oral tradition of different cultures, how they were able to entertain themselves for years, for a number of years, how they were able to entertain themselves with stories that they used to explain certain concepts about nature, to educate their children and all that as part of their oral literature. Now, we call them oral because at the time this literary works existed, there were no form of writing. So it is called oral literature because at the time it existed, there was no documentation, there was no proper documentation. So it is with the advent of writing and technology, these oral literatures came to be documented probably in anthologies or one book or another. So oral literature looks at oral traditions that exist in different cultures, in different cultural contexts, in different places. When we talk about oral literature, we are looking at myths, legends, we are looking at folktales, we are looking at fables, we are looking at historic facts. Okay? Now, why did the oral tradition in literature develop? One, to explain some things about the world, to entertain. There was a time in the past when people needed to explain to their children, to their younger generation, why things happened. So the elderly ones used stories to explain certain concepts about life, certain concepts about nature, concepts as why the sky is blue, why the sun comes up and then rises at a certain time, and why the sun rises at a certain time and goes down at a certain time. Then concepts about why the grass is even green, what happens when it is raining and the sun is up. All these are concepts that needed explanation. So people came up with stories. Some of these stories may be true or may not be true, but people came up with stories to explain this phenomena, this natural phenomena. So we also have to entertain. Some of this oral tradition or oral literature came up as a way of entertaining, in different cultures or in different traditions, as a way of entertaining themselves. People came up with stories to entertain one another. So in the case of while they were educating their younger generation, they were also entertaining themselves. Some of this entertainment came in form of poems, in form of music, in form of stories, and even drama, as the case may be. So, but because these things were not documented, some of them have been lost, some of them have phased off, some of them have just disappeared. Then we also have to teach moral lessons. Some of the stories teach moral lessons that otherwise, otherwise children may not be able to understand. So when the stories come in, when these moral lessons come in form of stories, children will be able to relate to them and then, take corrections and live better. Another one is to keep alive the culture and history of a people. One way to keep the culture alive, to keep the history of a people alive, is when these stories are passed down from one generation to another. So when these stories are told from one generation to another by words of mouth, we tend to keep the culture alive. All right. Now, the first one we are going to look at is myth. When we talk about myth, we are looking at stories that convey the beliefs and ideals of a culture and usually involves gods and goddesses. Now, these myths, well, they are called myths because some of these stories nobody is sure or certain that they actually happened or not. Some stories, like the stories of Zeus, the stories of Hermes, the stories of some of these Roman gods and Roman goddesses, some of the stories may be true or may not be true. Nobody knows the actual thing that happened. So it is called myth because some people believe it to be true and while others believe them not to be true. It says here, myths often provide examples of the way humans should behave. For example, the story of Phaeton warning mortals against attempting to be as powerful as the gods. Now, this is just one out of the many myths that are in existence. Myths also were used to explain events in nature, such as the seasons. There were so many myths that were used. For example, during the rainy season in African culture, during the rainy season, there are myths that were told, there were stories that were told as myths to explain why the rainy season came at a particular time in the year and why the dry season came at a particular time in the year, why people chose a particular time for farming and all that. All these things, all the stories may be true or may not be true. So they are myths because they contain some elements of uncertainty. Nobody knows whether they actually happened or not. Then we have legends. When we talk about legends, we are looking at people who did amazing things, heroic deeds in the past, and their stories are told. Now, when we look at myths and legends, myths and legends may share some similarities. Why and how? Legends are stories about heroic people, heroic heroes or heroines who did amazing things, who did heroic deeds in the past. Now, some of these stories may be exaggerated. So there may be there may be some myths about these legends, which people think they are either true or not. For example, we look at the story of Beowulf. Beowulf, who was an Anglo-Saxon warrior. Beowulf, when we read the story of Beowulf, a lot of people will say that Beowulf was a very amazing warrior. He killed beasts. He slaughtered beasts to save his people, to save the Danish kingdom and all that and all that. Now, it is also believed that Beowulf went to the underworld to kill a beast. Now, nobody knows if actually Beowulf went underworld. So these are things about legends that nobody knows whether they are true or not. So some things, some ideas about some legends may be mythical or maybe myths. So when we talk about myths and legends, they have some similarities. It says here that a legend refers to a traditional narrative or collection of stories concerning a specific individual or location. Originally, the term legend denoted a story related to a saint. Yes, legends share similarity with folk tales in terms of their content. So legends are also part of folk tales. So when we talk about folk tales, we're looking at stories that are shared in a particular geographical location. These stories are also used to teach morals to the younger generation. So legends are parts of folk tales. Now, these legends incorporate supernatural creatures, mythological elements, or explanations of natural events. So when we talk about these people that are legends, they are called heroes because they have some elements of the supernatural. It is believed that they have some supernatural powers that make them stand out as heroes and heroines. So those supernatural powers are what makes them outstanding, makes them amazing to people, and makes people hold them in awe. Okay, we have some legends, some common legends that we know. The legend of King Arthur. We know about how King Arthur and Merlin, the story of King Arthur and Merlin, and how they did so many things together. We have the legend of Beowulf. that I just mentioned earlier. We also have the legend of Robin Hood. We have the legend of Queen Amina of Zaria. Now, this is a Nigerian legend. It is told, or it is said, that Queen Amina of Zaria achieved great feats for her people. She was a warrior who fought alongside men and even defeated men in battles. We also have the legend of Usman Danfodio and even Queen Boudica of the Icenic tribe. Now, these are some of the legends. This is just to mention but few of the legend stories that we have. Moving further, we have folk tales. When we're looking at folk tales, as I mentioned earlier, legends and myths, or myths and legends, are also part of folk tales. So we are looking at stories, collection of stories that are composed and already passed from person to person by word of mouth. Most of the legends that we know today are stories. They are passed from person to person by word of mouth. Now, because they are passed orally, there are certain facts or certain things about these stories that may or may not be true. You know, when something is not documented, there tends to be some changes, some alterations. So if you tell somebody that Beowulf slaughtered a beast, another person, in trying to pass the information to another person, can alter the information. So one thing that happens about these folk tales is that because it is passed down orally from one person to another, there tends to be some alterations, some changes. That is why when you go to a particular or a geographical location, a story about a particular thing may be told differently from the way it is told in another place. For example, when you come to the Nigerian folk tale, we have an animal that we use to exhibit being sly or cunning. For example, that's the tortoise. The tortoise is an animal that is known as being deceitful, being sly, or being cunning. Now, when you go to Ghana, in Ghana, they have the spider, that is the Anansi. They call it the Anansi. I think Anansi or Nansewa. Yeah, Anansi. So the Anansi is known as a sly creature, and it is used in their folk tales as a sly and a cunning creature. So what I'm trying to say here is that when we look at folk tales may contain some elements of sameness, but there may be slight differences according to or depending on the geographical location and the tradition or cultural context. Now, it says that folk tales are set in the past and usually reflect the beliefs, goals, and customs of a people. Folk tales differ from myths in that they do not involve gods and goddesses, but rather tells tales of ordinary people. Yes, folk tales also change over time, often leading to exaggerations. So, because they are passed down orally, there may be some elements of exaggerations. The People Could Fly is an example of a folk tale. We have different examples of folk tales. When we come down to Nigeria, when we come down to our own Nigeria, there are different folk tales about different geographical locations, why a certain place is called a certain name. For example, when we look at Owerri, there is a folk tale about Owerri, why Owerri is called a certain name. There is a river in Owerri that has a particular name, and there's a story that revolves around that. So these are examples of folk tales. Then we have fairy tales. Fairy tales are a type of folk tale. They're usually set in the past. They typically involve fantasy, supernatural, or make-believe. When we talk about fairy tales looks at things that are not actually real. It involves fantasy. Now, fairy tales actually look at clearly defining the good and evil characters. One major thing about fairy tales is that it tries to tell a story where good triumphs over evil. They often have a happy ending. So an example of fairy tales are the Yeshen and the Harlequin and the Cinderella, the popular Cinderella story that we all know about. These are examples of fairy tales. Then we have fables. We call them fables because they are also a type of folk tale. Now, fables are used to teach moral lesson. Now, in fables, we have animals or characters as animals, and these animals can speak. We have some stories where we have the tortoise speaking, the tortoise saying things. We even have the parrot speaking. So stories such as these are called fables. For example, we have the most famous fables of the world. That's the fable of the Aesop who lived in ancient Greece. We also have the fable of the fox and the grapes, the boy who cried wolf, etc., etc. So we have different types of fables in different cultures. Different cultures have their own fables, as the case may be. So now we come to the end of this session. So as we all know, some of these stories are told from generation to generation, and because they are actually oral literature, there may not have been proper documentation of this oral literature. So some of the ideas, some of the items, some of the ideas in the stories tend to change because of oral handover. That is, passing them down orally from one generation to another. Remember, each culture has its own rich oral tradition. Now let's move on to the exam guide for some questions on this topic. Okay, now let's look at some questions. Let's search for some questions on the topic. Question 1, it says, a story which explains a natural phenomenon or justifies the beliefs of a society is, which of them is it? Legend, motif, fable, or myth? As you already know, it is myth. Myth is a story which is used to explain natural phenomenon or which justifies the belief of a society. Let's search for other questions. Another question, oral literature is a part of A, drama, A, folklore, C, poetry, D, music. The answer is B, folklore.